Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Rabbi.
We're going to Mishna Kesubos, Perek Aleph, Chapter 11, Mishna Gimel, Mishna 3. And today's day of learning is sponsored by Barry Steinberg in memory of his grandfather, Chaim ben Gedalia Hyman Steinberg, the Shemer Shavan Aliyah. Okay, now, we had before, let's just start the Mishnah. Machra Kesubasa Miktsasa. She sold her ksuba, or for her ksuba, or for part of it. Now we have learned, and we learned previously, or we have mentioned previously, that if a woman wants to collect her ksuba, or she needs to get her support, right? What does she do? She takes the property from the estate of her husband and she sells it, and with that she supports herself. Okay, that's what we learned before, and we have a Mishnah before that had an argument as to whether the sale of the property from the estate, whether it's for getting her support, whether it's for collecting her ksuba, and a discussion as to whether that has to be done through a beis din or not. So here we have a case like this. Machra ksubasa miktsasa. She sold some of her husband's property for the purpose of getting the payment for her entire ksuba, or for part of it. Okay? Now, they bring down here in the bottom that if we're talking about selling for the ksuba, okay, well, let's hold back for a second. Now, that's the first case. She sold her property either for the collection of the entire ksuba or for part of it. Mishkana ksubasa miktsasa. Mishkana means she set aside property as collateral for a loan. So she set aside the property she used as collateral the amount of her ksuba or part of it. And what it means like this. She borrowed money and told the lender that he could collect from her husband's estate up to the value of her ksuba if she did not pay him back. Since she is making use of property that she has owned for her ksuba, as if she has collected it. That makes sense, right? If I go ahead and I'm taking what I can take for my ksuba, and I'm saying, I'm using that instead for collateral, that acts like a collection. So if I tell the person, you can take take from the estate the entire ksuba or part of the ksuba. That's the case that's this case. And the point is that by using it as collateral, it's considered a collection, either in whole or in part. Or nasna ksubasa la'achar ay miktsasa. Or let's say she gifted away. She gave away her ksuba to somebody else or part of it to somebody else. She did. Now again, if she's doing that, that's considered like a collection. If she's using the ksuba money, if she's using the value of her ksuba within her husband's estate for her purposes, then it's like collecting it. Okay? So it says the Mishnah, Lo simkar es hasha'ar ela bebeis din. She can only sell the rest if it's in beis din. Now, what's happening is like this. What's happening is that what's the rest? What's the rest mean? Let's say we're talking about she collected her entire ksuba. So what's the rest that we're talking about? And what's the rest that we're saying there has to be done in beis din? So the explanation is the rest means that until now, when we're talking about her ksuba, we're talking about the benefit, the benefit. We're talking about the basic ksuba. The 200 zuz or 100 zuz. That's basic ksuba. Then there's something called what the husband adds more to it if he wants to. So the Mishnah is saying that when she's done these things, of either in some way collecting her ksuba, if she now wants to deal with the rest of the ksuba, meaning the additional part that he obligated himself to, additional monies he obligated himself to, that must be done in a beis din. Now, what we need to establish here is the following: that this part of the Mishnah is following the opinion of Reb Shimon that we had before. Reb Shimon said before, and we'll see from the fact that Chachamim later, the next part of the Mishnah, that we see that this half is Reb Shimon. We had Reb Shimon yesterday in the Mishnah that said that if we're talking about collecting her ksuba, from the estate, then she has to do that with the permission of Bezdin. If we're talking about getting support, then she doesn't have to do that in Bezdin. So here we have a situation where...
But that would be good through the next.
It doesn't go through anything. It has to. We said it has to go. It has to have three people there that know the value well enough to make sure things go right. But it's not a Beis-Din. So the point is that we're following. So Reb Shimon in yesterday's Mishnah said, if it's for support, then she doesn't need to go through a Beis-Din. If it's for the collection of a ksuba, she needs to go through a Beis-Din. So what we have here in the Mishnah is, number one, that at a certain point she is going to and there's no mention here in the Mishnah about support, right? All it says is that if she wants to collect the rest, she's got to do that in Beis-Din. She's got to do that in Beis-Din. No discussion about support. So what's happening here is two things. Number one, according to this half of the Mishnah, which is Reb Shimon, we know that if a woman collects her entire ksuba, then she gets no more support. The support that's guaranteed to her when she's a widow is either before she remarries or before she collects her whole ksuba, or she collects her ksuba. When she collects her ksuba, no more support. What if she only takes part of her ksuba? Not the whole ksuba, only part of the ksuba. Does she still get support then or not? So the Bartanura, the Bartanura explains here in the Mishnah that this part of the Mishnah that talked about collecting, she sold, meaning she collected her whole ksuba, part of her ksuba, or she gave it as security, whole ksuba, part of the ksuba. Once you go ahead and you make even a partial collection, according to the Tan of this half of the Mishnah, according to Reb Shimon, who is Reb Shimon, no more support. No more support. So there's no discussion here of trying to go ahead and sell properties for support which don't need a Beis-Din, because there is no more support. The only thing that's left to discuss in the Mishnah is in a situation where she where she either collected her ksuba or part of her ksuba, and now the question is, or basically it's really a discussion where she collected all of her ksuba. So she collected already her 200 or 100, whatever was coming to her in the most basic amount. What about the extra amount that he promised? That even though the ksuba itself, according to Reb Shimon, does not need a Beis-Din, I shouldn't say that, I made a mistake, no. The ksuba itself needs a Beis-Din, and in this case, once she has already gone ahead and collected her ksuba, or even part of the ksuba, and there's no more support involved, the only thing that would be left is the rest of the ksuba, or the extra amounts that he promised her in the ksuba. That has to be done in a Beis-Din. Meaning anything that's happening now has to be in a Beis-Din. There's no more support because she collected part of her ksuba. She collected it either in the form of actual selling to take the money herself, or as security, or as a gift. Whichever it may be, that's considered a collection. Once she's made a collection, there's no more talk of support. The only talk is about the collecting of ksuba, or the basic ksuba and the extra amount of ksuba, and that has to be done in a Beis-Din, according to Reb Shimon. The Chachamim say, she could sell the property of her husband's estate even 4 or 5 times, meaning she could break it up in little pieces 4 or 5 times. She could be selling a little, she could be collecting a little bit this way and a little bit this way, a little bit more, a little bit more. Even if she does that, she can do that, and then sell for food without a Beis-Din. Meaning, this is where we see that this is the Chachamim, and even if it says the Chachamim, and the first half of the Mishnah was Reb Shimon. The fact that the Chachamim say here that she sells even 4 or 5 times, and she can still sell for mezainis, that means she sold a little bit of property, collected a little bit of ksuba. She sold a little bit more, collected a little bit more ksuba. Until she hits the whole ksuba, she still can take support.
But she hasn't broken.
The point is that even if you broke it up as many times as you want, according to the first half of the Mishnah, once you even did part, you lose support. And he says you could break it up 4 or 5 times. Doesn't make a difference. she still is able to go ahead and sell property for food without Beis Din. So the Chachamim are actually of the opinion from yesterday's Mishnah, and here also it seems to be that the point is also being brought out when it says that she sells for collecting her ksuba. The Chachamim say she doesn't need a Beis Din. She doesn't need a Beis Din. We had in the Mishnah before that the Chachamim said that a husband would not want to have his wife be embarrassed and have to go through Beis Din. That's what the Chachamim said. And therefore, whether it's for the ksuba, whether it's for support, she doesn't have to go through she doesn't need the permission of the Beis Din. She doesn't need to go through that. And so the point of the Chachamim here is to bring out that even though, number one, she doesn't need a Beis Din for a ksuba, which we saw in yesterday's Mishnah, and here where she even collected part of the ksuba, unlike the first half of the Mishnah said that when you collect part of the ksuba, there's no more support. That's why there's no mention in the first half of the Mishnah of this. The Chachamim say, even though you did part, you still can sell for support. You can still take support. And once you take it for support, you don't got to do it in a Beis Din. According to the Chachamim, anything you don't got to do in a Beis Din. But what really comes out here from the Chachamim's words is that we see that the fact that they're talking about that even if you did parts, right, that you can still sell from a Zionist, that they're saying a partial collection of the ksuba does not exempt the estate from supporting her, while the Tanna Kama, the first half of the Mishnah, held it does. And therefore, the only thing that's to be discussed is collecting the ksuba money, and that is going to need a Beis Din. Now, the Chachamim continue and say, when she collects, when she sells the property, and she collects for her food, she should write it down. It should be written down. It's a piece of advice. When she sells the property, she should write on the bill of sale, meaning she's selling, right? There's a bill of sale. She writes in the bill of sale, I am selling this for support. Now, she's also going to write on it, I am selling this for ksuba, if that's what it is. And why should she do this? Why are the Chachamim telling her to do this? The answer is because if she sells property and collects, people might assume it's for support. And they might look at her as, wow, look at all this property she's selling for support. She must eat a lot. She must have a lot of needs.
They're telling stories.
She must have a lot of needs, and people are going to want to marry her. So she needs to. It's a piece of advice, not a belief, piece of advice that when she goes in and she sells, she should write in the bill of sale while she's selling it, so that people understand what's going on and won't start thinking that she's selling it all for food. Now, the Mishnah concludes, Ugarusha loisimkar ela bebeis din. A divorcee has to sell with the permission of Beis Din. This is a statement even being made by the Chachamim. The Chachamim said that a husband would not want his widowed wife to have to go through it's uncomfortable for him to go to Beis Din, and therefore he wouldn't want to put her through that. So if she's selling his properties for the ksuba, not for support, he doesn't want to have to go through that embarrassment, and therefore she doesn't have to go through Beis Din. But if it's the wife he divorced, then he's not really concerned about her embarrassment. And therefore, when she goes ahead and she sells, she has to go through Beis Din. Because of the fact that, again, the Chachamim say that the whole reason the Chachamim say, the husband doesn't make his wife go to Beis Din, whether it be for support, whether it be for ksuba, so she shouldn't have to go through embarrassment. But he's not concerned about that regarding the wife that he divorced. And therefore, when she goes and she sells, she has to go ahead and she has to sell in the Beis Din.
How much leeway does she have?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Whether
she doesn't have leeway. She has to do it through the Beis Din. If she's a divorcee, she has to do it through the Beis Din.
Could she be in a situation where she doesn't have to, but she still...
I don't know. But according to what it says here is that a grusha, if she's going in and she's selling her husband's property, now the way they bring it down here, interestingly, is that if a divorcee wants to collect her ksuba, oh, that's right. What am I saying? A divorcee doesn't get support. The ksuba doesn't. If the ksuba's support goes to a almana, to a widow, not to a divorcee. So the only thing that she has to do is collect her ksuba. So according to everybody, she has to do it in Beis Din. Rabbi Shimon said a woman doesn't have to do support in Beis Din because she shouldn't have to wait for Beis Din to get supported. But a divorcee is not being supported anyway. So the only thing she has left her ksuba. And even according to the Chachamim, being that the husband not concerned about her embarrassment, she has to do it with the permission of Beis Din. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.